Hello, book lovers! I'm Rachel Barenbaum, author of the novel Atomic Anna, and you're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. Check This Out is a series where I interview emerging and diverse authors you may not have discovered yet. A series brought to you by New Hampshire Public Radio and the Penn-Faulkner Foundation. Penn-Faulkner administers major literary awards and public programs, including the Penn-Faulkner Award for Fiction. We have a lot of exciting books and authors coming your way this season. Next week, I talk to Lucas Schaefer about his debut, The Slip. Tune in next week for that interview. Today on the show, my guest is Aaron John Curtis, and we are discussing his brand new debut novel, Old School Indian. Aaron, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thanks, Rachel.
Old School Indian is an irreverent exploration of the power and secrets of family, the capacity for healing and intimacy, and the effects of history. The book introduces us to Abe Jacobs, who is, as white people say, a Mohawk Indian from the St. Regis tribe. He left the reservation at 18 and hasn't looked back until now. Now he's 43 and suffering from a rare disease, and it looks like it's going to kill him. Running from the diagnosis and a failing marriage, he returns to the Rez to see his Uncle Budge, a healer and a drunk. The novel follows Abe's journey as he goes through the steps, tries to heal, and confronts the parts of his past and present that he's wanted to hide. The book is funny at times, heartbreaking at others. There's sidebars dealing with Native American life and history, and poems that lay bare Abe's innermost feelings. Throughout the book, the looming question for me was around healing. How do we heal? How do we walk away from a past that hurts? Abe's illness leaves gaping wounds on his skin, but those wounds extend deep into his soul, and this novel takes us through the journey of figuring out how to make them stop bleeding. It also takes us deep into questions around death. How do we want to die? At one point, Uncle Budge asks, "Have you loved? Been loved?" If you have, then your life ain't garbage. And that seems to be Aaron's point in this debut novel, Old School Indian. Okay, Aaron, before we even start this interview, I want to talk to you about language, and I just want to be completely honest that I'm a little bit nervous to talk to you about language in this book because you open up with an entire note on language and talking about how you say certain words and what they mean. Language is really a center point in this book. You even say at one point, if you find the word Indian jarring the first time you come across it, please keep going. I promise we'll gut that particular fish later. So I want to gut it now.
Fair enough.
So can we start with you reading on page 9? I would love to hear, how you deal with this in the book, and then we're going to talk about it a little.
Sure. Abe is Mohawk Indian. You could argue Indian is a misnomer, and you'd be right. I could argue no one asked us when they decided we should be called Native American, and I'd be right. Somewhere in the 80s, non-res folks decided Indians was wrong at best and offensive at worst, so they let everyone, including us, know we should be called Native Americans. Maybe call Abe that. You shouldn't call him Indian. Sorry, but you don't know Abe like that. It sounds weird coming from your lips, dismissive in some way. In fact, I'm not sorry. And don't call him Native American either. It's a BS PC phrase no matter who's using it, just a way of saying you don't know any Native people. How about you call him Abraham Jacobs since that's his name? Abraham Jacobs might not sound like an Indian name, but you've got the hardcore Catholic first name and the surname of what used to be the biggest landowners on Akwesasne. So if you're in the know, then you know the name Abraham Jacobs is res as hell, cuz. You want to talk misnomers, then let's talk Mohawk. In the 16th century, bridging a language gap didn't happen one-to-one. A translator somewhere spoke a common tongue with another translator somewhere else. So translator number 1, let's call him Bert, translated the first language, let's say Kanyinkea, into the shared language, usually French. Then translator number 2, we'll say Ernie, translated the translation into the second shared language. So Bert did Kanyinkea into French, then Ernie did French into English. And that's if you were lucky. More often, you had to mix and match between 3 and 4 translators like some lame game of Rummikub. In the indigenous understanding of life, this is a wonderful opportunity to spend time getting to know each other. To the settler's mind, this is an incredible waste of time which could better be spent gaining wealth and status. Is it any wonder settlers stopped talking and started shooting?
That is the perfect example of your irreverent tone and really introducing us to the fact that there are lots of different terms in this book for different people. Do we call Abe Indian? Do we call him Mohawk, right? What words do we use? How do we even talk about the people in this book? So, how did you think about framing that as you started to sit down and write this book?
Well, the title has always been Old School Indian, and that's kind of been all encompassing. But there's a younger generation of activists that are very rightly pointing out that that's wrong. And for the most part, when we're at home, we will call ourselves Mohawk. There's not a lot of Native American or Indian being bandied about, but I just wanted to bring up all these different terms and just how none of them really describe who Abe Jacobs is.
I love it because I think that people get very nervous. I get nervous too sometimes, right? What's the PC term? What am I supposed to call Abe? Is he Indian? Is he indigenous? Is he Native American? Because I don't want to insult you. I don't want to insult the book or readers or any, listeners. I want to get it right. But in my head, I keep thinking, what is right? And I think that you try to tackle that by saying, head on, let's gut this fish. Let's just talk about it right now and lay out the terms.
Yeah, I mean, whoever you're speaking to that's native will tell you how they want to be addressed. So that's the only, you know, real rule to go by. I can't even speak for every Mohawk, let alone all 600 different nations there are across the country. Everyone's going to tell you something different.
And tell us about, just to ground us for a second, tell us about your own ancestry and your own background.
Mother was born and raised on Akwesasne, which is where part of the book takes place. And I kind of wrote it to honor my family. I still had family there. I sent early drafts of the book to them and I got the green light. My dad is Scotch Irish. And once you get past my mom's generation, pretty much all of us intermarried and we're mixed. But in the book, it's like there's just the Irish Mohawk cousins and everyone else is just Mohawk all the way down. And so it's like, okay, it's this fantasy Mohawk paradise that doesn't actually exist in the world except for directly on the res.
And the res is in northern New York, right near Syracuse.
Yeah, it's one of the 2 reservations that straddle a international border. There's one in Texas and Mexico, and Akwesasne straddles the St. Lawrence. So there's a Canadian side and a New York State side.
So the book is based in upstate New York and it centers on Abe Jacobs. He is the main character. Can you introduce us briefly to Abe? Who is Abe?
Abe is Mohawk, and he left the res to go to Syracuse University, and he met a lady who is from Miami and followed her back down because he fell in love. And he kind of doesn't really do much with his life. He centers his love of this woman rather than thinking about what he wants for himself or how he can improve himself. It's more about trying to make her happy. And of course, that's not long run sustainable. So he's just kind of going through this ennui and not pursuing his talents. And I feel like that manifests in his health issues. And that ultimately drives him back to the reservation for healing.
And he's a character who's sort of trying to figure out who he is this entire time. Where does he fit? He's not quite Mohawk, but he's not quite not. And he's sort of a student at Syracuse, but he's sort of not. Sort of where does he fall? He's sort of married, but he's not really married. And that sort of seems to be what's driving this book.
I've been calling it a coming of middle age. But yeah, he's kind of just trying to figure out how to live a more authentic life and just be more of himself and a better person.
And so he's a bookseller in Miami when we meet him, and he's coming back to the res. And there seems like there are a lot of parallels in Abe's life to your life. Are there?
Yeah, 100%. I was having health issues in 2015, similar to Abe, the lesions and joint pain, muscle pain, exhaustion, brain fog, the numbness, which I still have, was the last symptom that kind of made him worry it was going to spread to his brain, and that's what I was dealing with. And I was in a writers group at the time, and I brought all of this fear of dying young and not having done anything with my talent. I've been writing my whole life, but I have been focused on, I was like, this is going to be my artistic pursuit is just writing. But I hadn't done anything with it. So I was angry at myself for not having put myself out there more, angry at the doctors who couldn't diagnose me. And this was going on for months. So I brought this short story to my writers group. It was filled with all of these emotions and they really enjoyed it. So they were like, flesh this out. So it became this novella. And when I brought that, a friend of mine says, well, this is really great. I would love to see this be a novel, but why does he live in Tampa and not Miami? Why is he selling insurance instead of books? Why is he single instead of married? And I'm like, well, it's fiction. I'm not writing a memoir. It can't just be what's actually going on. And she said, no, just hit the gas, like put it in Miami, put him at Books and Books, marry him, just go for it.
So once you brought the character Abe closer to you in your own life, the book just sort of started writing for you?
Yes. I'm not sure when, maybe a third to halfway through, I got this image in my head. And this was at the point where my doctors got a handle on my own health issues. I found a treatment that worked. And I got this image in my head, and it was of Uncle Budge. He was kind of surrounded by smoke, and it looked like he was hitting a home run, but I couldn't tell what was in his hands. I didn't know where he was. And writing towards that image, I found holes in what had actually happened in my life that didn't get me there. So that was where the fiction portion of the narrative came in, was trying to fill in those gaps to reach that image, which I knew was kind of closer towards the end.
I love that. So it's really, I mean, all these parallels that I see, they're really there, and it's really a piece of you. I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. My guest today is Aaron John Curtis, and we are talking about his brand new debut novel, Old School Indian. I want to circle back to this question of language because Abe, the character in your book, spends a lot of time thinking about language, and you spend a lot of time writing about language. Do you also spend a lot of time thinking about this?
I do. And I think I mean, one of the earliest stories that my mom told me was going to school. She was bilingual when she started school. You know, Kaninkea was still the main language on the res. She went there and she was shy. That was it. She didn't want to mingle. One of the teachers got down on her level, spoke to her, and Kaninkea was like, "Oh, go ahead and play with the other kids, whatever." And then she stands up. She says to another white teacher, "She's like, oh, look, see, they're savages. They don't even teach their children how to talk." Not knowing that my mother could understand it because she spoke English. So basically, they beat the language from her, and she developed a stutter in English, which I didn't know. I was surprised. Like, I always knew she was soft spoken, which is so strange because her personality is so formidable. But she was always soft spoken and kind of took time to speak. And that was because she had a stutter up until high school. But she's never been able to reclaim her language. She's tried, but I think there's just maybe too much trauma there. So it seems like anytime I write, language loss always comes up, whether I want it to or not. I would love to be able to talk to some native speakers, and I'm very lucky to be a Mohawk because there's 3,000 native speakers still using the language on a regular basis, and that's mostly on the Canadian side, which is why they have a little chip on their shoulder that they're a little bit more tradish than the New York side. But yeah, I mean, I fantasize that the book is a big hit, and I get to take a year off and go back and like soak up the language, so it's not just the dozen words or so that I have. Did always told me I had a good accent, so that's what I cling to. And I'm like, I think maybe that means something. Maybe that means that I'm meant to bring the language back to my family, but we'll see.
I'm really sorry that happened to your mom, and you reflect that sadness in the book. I felt it, and your main character, Abe, really wants to also, I think maybe much like you've just described, really wants to speak Kanakea, and he wants to learn more, and when he's talking to Uncle Budge, he tries to fill in those holes, and he tries to pick up more and more words as he goes, and it's very powerful, this fact that he feels the loss of this language.
350 books came out the Tuesday Old School Indian came out. So it's been a very crowded month. So I'm like, okay, keeping that in mind, what do I want to get out of this tour? And I was like, if I can improve my Kenny Chaos skills, that would be a wonderful blessing for me and my family. And I was working on trying to introduce myself in Kenny Keha. And at that Phoenix event, there were three Hopi women, and one of them was an elder. And she's there on, leaning over her cane. And she says, "Oh, yeah, language loss. That really hit home with me." And I was like, "Yeah, I've been working in my hotel room, and I know Sego, Jungyats, Aaron John Curtis, Kenekehaka, Niwakowa Sultan." "Ganike and she says, "Oh, you sound like my Hopi friends at home," and I was like, "Oh, that's really nice," and as I'm going to sleep, it's now going through my head. So the very last reading that I had was, in Berkeley at the Bay Area Book Festival, and I did the intro, and it went great, and I was just like, "Okay, I can maybe this is something that can happen for me."
It's amazing. I really think that the soul of a people is in their language and the way they describe things, and you talk about that in the book, the fact that there is no strict word for love in Kanikeha or umbrella. Again, right? There's no simple word for umbrella either. Can you just talk briefly about those 2 words and how you say them or think about them in Kanikeha? I'm trying to imitate you. Kanikeha.
I don't know. Tenikea is good. The only weird thing is that the K sound, I'm still trying to work on this myself, but the K sound is like a K and a G at the same time. Some people, when they say it, they're saying more like Genyingea. Some people are saying more Kenyingea, but it's supposed to be that kind of, it's like this guttural K and G at the same time. I'm trying to get the phrase down for I am learning the Mohawk language, which is a little longer. And I'm like, okay, we'll debut them at some point.
I love that I'm getting a language lesson in this interview. So let's go back to how you talk about, love and umbrella. In the book, there's a brief scene where Abe brings in the word umbrella in Kanikeha. Can you talk about that scene and introduce us to the language through that scene and that word?
Well, basically, he was trying to look for the longest Kenyankea word that he could find to try to stump his classmates. And when I actually did this when I was 9, I want to say, it was wasp. I just pulled the Mohawk dictionary off the shelf and was like, "Oof, that is a killer." Brought that in, and it stays up there for a week, and then it becomes extra credit on a test. So when I was writing it as a poem for Abe, I did umbrella, and I don't know the words for umbrella. A lot of this I used textbooks from 1993, which was there were 6 reservations that were speaking Kenikeha. They didn't want dialects to contribute to language loss, so they got together and decided this is how we're going to say everything. So I only have a dozen or so words that my family still uses, and a lot of what I used in the book comes from these textbooks, and umbrella was one of them. So it was just me trying to find a really long word. But the whole "I love you" thing is it's true. There's no Mohawk word for love, and this is something that comes up because Duda never said "I love you" to any of her children, and just to kind of mollify themselves when it became painful, one of the siblings would be like, "Well, there's no Mohawk word for love. Like it's okay." And now, because we're trying to bring the language back in a post-colonial setting, people will say, "Gonalugwa" is "I love you," which is not really true. It's "You are the blood that runs," Gonalugwa, which is a way of saying, like, "My heart beats for you." But because we're trying to bring a language back in a post-colonial setting, we'll just be like, "Oh, Gonalugwa means I love you." And we're losing that original use of the language, which is maybe you have a different way to say I love you for every person in your life. Maybe you are trying to renew that feeling of love, so you say it a different way every time you see this one partner. And I tried to do that for a few months, and it's very exhausting, and it just kind of makes you realize how quickly we live our lives. And like you said, that culture and language, the way they tie into each other, just how slow moving you have to be through your days and through your thoughts just to think, to look at this person and be like, how is my emotion hitting me in this moment, and how do I want to express it? So it's kind of a shame that we're just like, "Oh, gotta love means I love you. It's great." And it's like that's like a little tiny piece of it.
I mean, I love that you point out using the word love is a shorthand that's sort of meaningless, as opposed to in Mohawk, you describe the feeling. You make my heart beat. You are the blood in my body. You are, however you describe the emotion of that we call love is how you say it in Mohawk.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much like the whole Indian thing. It's like it's a shorthand. We just put there's your placeholder. Let's move on.
Is Mohawk a written language or is it only spoken? Like, how do you have a Mohawk dictionary?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a written language. I think they did it in '93.
And what's the alphabet?
It's very much kind of like Mandarin. It's a lot to do with the accents and the glottal stops and how fast or slow you're saying certain segments of the word. So there's not a lot of nouns. I know that. So it's a lot of how you describe things. So when you look at a sheet of here's how you conjugate a verb, and this is why I'm struggling, is because I'm like, this looks like the same word written 20 times. But it's like as you go forward like a tiny, tiny little bit, you're kind of like, oh my god, this is the oh, with the accent over it, like, that's a Y sound. Like, you start to get one little insight that encourages you. For a while, when I first started, looking at Kenyan Keha versus Kenyan Kehaka written down, I'm like, "This is the same word. How is this different?" It's just like, "Oh, well, the glottal stop goes in a different place, and the accent's in a different place, and there's an extra syllable on the end." And that took, I don't know how many years of looking at it in the text of the book to be like, now it's like I can write it out and it's just like secondhand. But yeah, when you're first learning it, it does look a lot. I mean, it all looks the same. It looks like just a big block of the same repeated word.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. My guest today is Aaron John Curtis, and we are talking about his brand new debut novel, Old School Indian. We've talked a lot about language. We've talked a little bit about Abe. So I want to zero in on Uncle Budge, who is really the other main character. I absolutely loved him. And Abe goes to him because Western medicine is failing. And his Uncle Budge is a healer. And so he goes up to the res to visit Uncle Budge and hopefully find a cure for this disease. Tell us about Uncle Budge. Introduce us to him.
Uncle Budge came into an early draft because at the point that it was a novella, there wasn't a healer. And one of my writer friends was like, "Oh, what if there was a healer?" And I was like, "Oh my God, that is such a trope. Why would you even say that?" In my head, out loud, I was like, "That's a great idea. Thanks," you know? And then I remembered that we have a healer in the family. I have a great uncle who that's what he does. He's Lewis Burning Sky Butch Connors, and for a long time, the character was Butch Billings. And I was like, well, I got to hide him a little better than that. And there's a lot of like junior on other reservations, from what I hear. I don't know why taking on this colonial practice of let's name all of our sons after ourselves, but they kind of passed that on. So there's a lot of juniors. So, and I was asking, it's Budge. So like the older version is, Joe Schmo, and then when you get to Joe Schmo Jr., they're Budge. They're budgy when they're kids, and then as they get older, they just become Budge. I don't know why, but that's just kind of how it happens. So I had him in mind, like, okay, well, I can base him on that. I don't know him all that well, though. I've seen him in action a couple times, but it's not like we've hung out. As far as demeanor, he's based on my uncle who did the cover art for Old School India. Just his kind of no nonsense, wiseacre demeanor. It's very much based on my uncle.
So Uncle Budge is the healer. And I'm wondering if you could read for us to talk about why Abe goes to him and what he's thinking. So could you read for us?
Sure. What Abe doesn't need to explain to Budge is why he waited for his legs to get so grizzly before he saw a doctor. You probably do, though. First, doctors sterilized several women in his family without their knowledge. In Indian country, back in the day, doctors sterilized any native woman who came into their office. Didn't matter if their office was part of Indian health services or if they were private practitioners. Sometimes they'd make up an excuse to get her on the operating table. Sometimes they'd destroy the woman's fallopian tubes by leaving mepercrine capsules in her uterus after pelvic exams. Because crimes against natives tend to take place on reservations, and the criminals, doctors mutilating indigenous women in this case, are tried off the reservation by non Indians, if they're tried at all, they never faced consequences. Not a day in jail, nary an arrest, not even a lost job. This went on until word got out in the 70s and the practice became frowned upon. So in the 1970s, not the 1870s, but the time of disco, The Godfather, and the first five novels of an up and coming author named Stephen King, hospitals included a sterilization form with the rest of the admission paperwork. They'd have the woman sign everything after the drugs kicked in, or they'd deny her pain medication until she signed. Then, while the doctor had her open and unconscious, he would snip her tubes. Or if he was feeling especially frisky that day, he'd give her a hysterectomy. I just realized that I changed all the meds that he takes. Like I made them all up, but Meprocrine is the actual name of the drug that they do that with. So we did sneak a real medication in there.
That paragraph there was terrifying when I read that. It is not talked about very much. Talk about why you added that and, how it felt to put that in there.
I think, I mean, it's my debut novel, and you worry that you're not going to get a second one, so you try to address everything that's ever happened. So you're really throwing a lot. And this was one of the things when I was sharing work. I had a short story about this happening, and no one wanted to publish it. So you kind of go, oh, well, no one wants to hear this story. As you said, it's not the easiest thing to hear. It's important to talk about it because it's still going on now in ICE facilities. And it's just kind of state sponsored. And it's strange that this is a thing that goes on and we don't address it and we don't talk about it. And I just put that in there to honor people in my family because I feel like a reader might not know if I left it out that this is something that my family has dealt with, but I would know and it would feel like a disservice if I didn't include it. I try to include things like that in a fashion that it doesn't take away from the narrative itself.
It's terrifying that this still happens today, and I think it really adds to the narrative because you start with a very sort of offhanded sentence in what you just read, brief sentence. Abe doesn't need to explain to Budge why he waited for his legs to get so grisly before he saw a doctor. And you could have left it there, right? And then you decided to say, "But you do," as the author, and you put it in there. And this is one of the things that I thought was a real strength in this book was that you dig into the background without taking us too far out of the narrative, and you tell us exactly why, because I would have thought, if you hadn't put this explanation in, I would have thought, "Oh, maybe he had a bad experience as a kid. Something hurt." But no, this is much deeper. This is generations deep, hundreds of years of mistreatment, and you put it in there. And there are many other parts that you add in this way and add the history, and I thought it was a really terrifying and strong piece of this novel. So Budge understands why, and they start the healing process. And part of this healing brings Abe back into his marriage, which is failing. So we have to talk about his wife, although I want to admit to you that I really didn't like her. I thought she was not a nice person, but I'm wondering, this is probably controversial, but I loved reading the character. Like, I don't wanna hang out with her. Doesn't mean I don't love her in the book. Let's talk about the wife, because I was fascinated with her, and I wanted more of her. Introduce us to the wife in this failed marriage.
Well, the wife's name is Alex. She is from Miami, and they meet in college, and she's just kind of this very charming world beater. And Abe is instantly smitten the moment he lays eyes on her, and she's polyamorous and kind of takes him on that journey. Like, oh, come on, we're only teenagers. We can't live the rest of our lives together without experimenting and sleeping around and all that stuff. And they try very hard to make it work. And, eventually it comes to a head because it has to. Someone's going to have to change their mind or you're going to have to split. But I always wanted her in this book because she really is like that. She walks into a room and it's just kind of like everyone, she's like the life of the party. And I was surprised that people had such strong negative feelings towards her.
So what grated on me about her wasn't her views on monogamy as much as it was that she didn't seem to have this big heart for her husband. She didn't seem so devastated when he was sick and getting sicker. She wasn't there to help hold him up in the way that I wanted her to be there. And that happens sometimes when people see their partners or family members getting sick. They get scared and they turn the other way. And it seemed like that's what she did. And that's where I wanted to yell at her and say, "Get back there. Go with Abe to the res," because she lets him go off alone on this journey.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. I think that if Abe was a different person, he might have, made that same argument and just been like, "Come with me." But it's that symptom of I'm centering my life around this person and trying to make them happy. So it's like, oh, whatever you want to do, kind of thing. If you need to stay here while I'm up there, like that's okay. Um, rather than fighting for himself a little more. But yeah, I definitely see that. Yeah, it's less of who she is and more of what she does to Abe that people have an issue with.
So people have been talking to you about how much they hate her or love her.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, some people are like, "Oh my god," they would want a book about her, kind of thing. For a lot of people, it's just like, "Oh my god, oh, just what is her story?" Like all this kind of stuff.
I wanna tell you that is the sign of a well-written character. If you have people who hate her and people who love her and they're talking about her, good job on you. If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. My guest today is Aaron John Curtis, and you're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. We're talking about Aaron John Curtis's brand new debut novel, Old School Indian. I want to dig into another character in this book who's a sort of character. His name is Dominic Dear Woods. And he starts us off in the book, and we see lots of little poems popping up from him. And it's not until about a third of the way through the book, maybe, that we figure out he's actually Abe's alter ego. Or at least it took me that long to figure out that's who he was. Introduce us to Dominic and his role in this novel.
Like you said, Dominic is his alter ego, and in finding his voice, sometimes he has to put on a character because he struggles seeing himself a certain way, or behaving a certain way, or giving voice to certain thoughts and feelings. So he's like, "Well, it's not me. I'm channeling it through this guy." I also like that, like in my mind, Abe left the res, but Dominic never did. So he's a little bit more of an authentic voice that can call Abe out a little bit on his, just the ways that being away has affected him. I mean, everyone, oh, how'd you come up with it? How'd you come up with it? And the whole thing was to try to get away from those first drafts. Like I said, they were kind of filled with anger and, sadness and stuff. And someone was like, oh, change it to, because it was all first person from Abe's point of view. Is someone was like, change it to third, see what that unlocks. And then it was like when it went from first person to third person, they felt like it lost something. So I was like, oh, maybe I can have my cake and eat it too. Who then is telling this story? And it was just like this voice just kind of popped into my head. And he had a lot more empathy for Abe and his foibles, and more sympathy for the choices that he makes. And it was a lot easier to spend time with him, who was going to kind of joke you through it, versus Abe, who was going to kind of be beating himself up and beating you up as you were reading it. And yeah, I was very appreciative that Dominic showed up because it was such a long process of going from that short story to finished book. Like spending almost a decade with him was a lot easier than spending a decade with Abe.
And Dominic literally does stand up, and he gets up on the stage and he inhabits sort of this, his Indian persona, his Mohawk persona, and he puts it out there for the audience. And then often he's mocked for it, and people heckle him, the audience, and he has to choose when he's on stage. Does he dig in more or does he keep going? And during one of these moments, you wrote another very moving passage and description of history. Would you mind reading for us?
Not to detour further during a digression. If I had, everyone's like, kill your darlings. If I had my darlings, it would be digressions all the way down. But, you know, it would be a disservice to the Lakota and to natives in general to mention Mount Rushmore without unpacking its significance. First off, Mount Rushmore is a desecration of the six grandfathers, a mountain sacred to the Lakota as a site for prayer and provisions. After decades of activism, the Supreme Court awarded the Lakota Nation $400 million. The Lakota, as nicely as possible, told them to shove the money and give them their land back. To add insult to profanity, the presidents represented there all committed atrocities in Indian country. Abraham Lincoln ordered the largest mass execution in U.S. history, the simultaneous hanging of 38 Dakota on made up charges. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote, merciless Indian savages practiced warfare, which is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. This was, of course, how settlers treated natives, not the other way around. According to his private letters, Jefferson baked this into the founding of the U.S. in the hope that everyday citizens would take up the hatchet and never lay it down until all Indians are exterminated. Theodore Roosevelt's first speech as governor of New York included these gems. This continent needed to be won. We could not leave this domain the hunting ground of squalid savages. It had to be taken by the white race. Roosevelt also joked about the axiom, the only good Indian is a dead Indian, saying, I don't go so far as to think that the only good Indian is the dead Indian, but I believe 9 out of every 10 are, and I shouldn't like to inquire too closely into the case of the 10th. Three of the greatest presidents in American history, folks.
Wow. I mean, there you go. Again, you're able to put in the people often talk about Mount Rushmore just quickly offhand. It's used as a reference. And here we have Dominic on stage, and he gives us this little detour into history that is not commonly discussed, maybe not common knowledge. Again, you got a chance to put that in there. Very powerful.
Thank you.
Did you get pushback from your editors or anybody along the way for adding these kinds of detours in the book?
Well, the first version of the manuscript was it was kind of non-linear and circular, and it started over and over again. And it was kind of like the image of I had in my mind is you're sitting there waiting for a bus, and this dude comes up, sits next to you, and just starts talking smack. And it's just like, oh my God, when is this bus going to get here? And it was all these kind of threads that went nowhere, stories that kind of just started but didn't end. And then it was like, if you made it through all that, then you got to the real story. And my agent very wisely pointed out that maybe you don't want to challenge the reader for 50 pages when you're competing with social media and TV and whatever. Maybe just start. And I was like, okay, yeah, you're right, I'll do that. So there were digressions like that throughout the book. And as the book went on, there became a point where the driving narrative becomes, will he be healed? And if so, how will he be healed? So we don't want any more digressions that would take away from solving that mystery for the reader. I mean, a lot of them, it sounded like they asked me to get rid of anything that was near and dear to my heart in that way. But they just kind of pointed out that, as we roll on, we got to kind of streamline and kind of get to the finish line. So it was more about what I felt I could lose, and keeping in the ones that worked was important as well. So you kind of know once you're trying to chop away half of a giant manuscript, what needs to stay and what can go.
So you're taking us towards the end of the book, and in one of the final scenes, Abe changes his haircut entirely. He gets, the actual Mohawk haircut, which is the shaved sides, hair in the middle. And throughout the book, he talks about his braids, his hair, how he wears it. And he's worried because he wants to look like a real Indian, or what does an Indian look like? And his family, he asks them about it, and they're like, we don't care. Wear your hair however you want. But he has sort of this transformation. Could you just spend a minute and tell us about his hair and what is it behind that?
Well, his hair is definitely my own struggles with my hair that has been to the middle of my back at some points in my life and in shaved into a mohawk at other points in my life. And you kind of think about how you present to the world, and identity is such you just struggle. And I talk to, other native authors on tour, and it's definitely a thing. Am I authentic enough? Am I presenting the image I should present in order to fulfill an expectation in people's minds? And it is crazy. And I did have my aunts kind of mocking me for it, of like when I was younger and trying to dress a certain way or style myself a certain way. They'd be like, oh yeah, why don't you just get some feathers, kind of mocking me. And I'm like, yeah, it's still something I struggle with. And I do like that he says it's a outward commitment to his inner self getting that mohawk, but I don't know that I would do that again.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. My guest today is Aaron John Curtis, and we're talking about his brand new debut novel, Old School Indian. Aaron, let's talk about the title. So it actually comes up in a sentence in the book when Abe is talking to Uncle Budge, and Uncle Budge says to him, your body went old school Indian and conjured its own death. Tell us what that means. What is the significance of the title?
It's just, as a reader, I thought about what I like when I read. And, I like recipes, I like book recommendations, and I like it when the title sneaks its way in an organic way into the narrative. And Budge's case, he just told a story that explains how natives called up white people and basically invented their own genocide. So he's like, you've always been healthy your whole life. Nothing could take you down. So now your body is turning against itself. So he's like, much like natives back in the day invented white people to destroy themselves. your immune system is inventing this disease to destroy you.
So, what is an old school Indian?
I think it's up to the reader. If, death of the author, my opinion on who the old school Indian doesn't matter. But if my opinion does matter, then to me, it's always been Budge Billings. Some people think it's Dida. Some people think it's Dominic. Some people think it's me, and I'm like, it is not me, believe me. But yeah, I think it's Budge.
Aaron, let's talk about Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving for Abe is actually a big holiday. He seems to absolutely love it, but most Indians don't, according to this book and what you've written. And you address that right in the book. Would you read for us about Thanksgiving and Abe's thoughts on Thanksgiving?
Okay. People are sometimes surprised to learn of Abe's love for Thanksgiving. I admit many natives, plenty of them living in Akwesasne, in fact, believe Thanksgiving is BS, a whitewashing both of native history in general and the Wampanoag genocide in particular. Obviously, the story of generic, unnamed Indians showing up, welcoming the pilgrims, feeding them, then fading into obscurity while the pilgrims peacefully inhabit the New World without displacing or slaughtering anyone is a lie that represents how American history largely overlooks the genocide of natives. Today, the Wampanoag live on Martha's Vineyard, unrecognized by the federal government. For them, Thanksgiving is a day of mourning. I don't have research to back me up, but my guts tell me Thanksgiving became more accepted among the Haudenosaunee because of our Thanksgiving address. The words we say before all else, or what we say before we do anything important, or words spoken before all others. We start every gathering by giving thanks to all aspects of creation: people, plants, animals, the wind and waters, the sun, moon, and stars. It's different each time based on whatever's in the speaker's heart at that moment. You might stand and spend your hour naming every bird you've ever encountered on your land. Then everyone will say, "Now our minds are one," and you'll sit back down. You probably won't be asked to give the Thanksgiving address again, but your backyard word tour will still count. Because our religious practices were banned until 1978, my theory is the Haudenosaunee started hiding our traditions within the confines of this new holiday, and we never stopped embracing it.
So, Abe actually loves Thanksgiving. Let's talk about that for a minute. Why? What does he love?
The getting to see his family and spending time with them, and it's just a celebration. There's food all day, then bonfires all night, and stories out by the bonfire, and that kind of sustains him for the rest of the year living in Miami and not being around his family. So you got to go in and soak up the stories, soak up the food, soak up the love, and then it sees you through another year. Loosely based on reality of me, but yeah, I mean you have to do Thanksgiving. It's just the best.
In many ways, this book is about death, dying, facing your own death, or Abe facing his death, and Abe asking himself, was my life worth it? And Budge says, have you been loved? Did you love? Because, if that happened, basically, he says, then it was worth it. Can you just give us just your thoughts on Abe, how he thinks about death and life?
I really like the elder point of view. He just keeps bringing Abe back to where he is in the present. And Abe is panicking. Oh my God, I'm gonna die. I'm dying. I'm gonna die. And Budge takes his pulse. Look pretty lively to me, man. Like pointing it out, and then yeah, he's complaining that he hasn't done anything with his life. It was terrible. And Budge is like, you gave love and you received love. Like, come on, that's a great life. And just kind of trying to change his perspective. And it's a lot of that healing how he sees the world, which in turn can inform his physical healing. And I think this lack of acknowledgement of death in the culture of large doesn't really serve anyone. It always comes as a big surprise whenever anything like that comes up. And it's like we all owe, we're born, and that's the debt that comes in. And we don't know when it's coming due, but we live like it's a subtraction that's just decades in the future. And when Abe has these health issues, it kind of just puts that in the forefront of, okay, I'm on a shortened timeline. I need to get my affairs in order and try to just get as much out of the time I have left as I can. And that's not a bad way to live in general. Like What do you want your day to be? Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have been getting that, the spiritual aspect, which I think is the most important part of the book for me. Abe has that moment. I had that moment of, and the same thing. I was looking at 18 months before vascular dementia set in, and it's just kind of like I went from 5 years to 18 months, like, And for Abe to have that and to have that pushing him forward and just trying to inform how he lives his life, I wanted people to read this and have this be kind of that reminder that we never know when it's coming and maybe we can live a little better.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. My guest today is Aaron John Curtis, and we are talking about his brand new debut novel, Old School Indian. Aaron, let's talk about the cover. You mentioned very briefly that it's based on your uncle's art. Tell us about this stunning cover.
Well, my uncle is Alex Jacobs. He has been artist for 50 years and spends half the year in Santa Fe, half the year on the res. He had the American Spirit packages that made mountains in the background, and this was layers of fabric. Like this, the shirt is fabric that his dad actually touched. The hat is fabric that did the touch. And I saw this picture on Facebook, saved it on a jump drive back in the day. And when Zando approached me and they were like, "Oh, what would you like to see on the cover?" I sent off the JPEG. And then a few months go by and they're like, "Oh, here's your cover." And it was this. And apparently they had asked me to ask Uncle Alex for permission. And I was like, "Okay, he doesn't do this as a hobby. Like this is how he makes his living. Like we got a problem." They were like, "Well, you better ask him right quick." I did, and his reaction was, "Where did you get that?" And I said, "I don't know. I saved it off of Facebook in like the early aughts. I just really liked it." And he said, "Okay, I'll take that answer." So they gave him an honorarium. You couldn't find the original, and he didn't have any high resolution images. They had Emily Mahone, who's an illustrator in New York City, recreate it digitally.
Wow. Wow. I love that story. You are a bookseller, Aaron. How did that affect your writing or influence your writing of this book, Old School Indian?
Mhm. I think that just that tendency to recommend books, I couldn't escape it. I heard people comment on like, "Wow, you have a lot of book recommendations in this," and hopefully, like the digressions, it's very matter of fact. Since he is a bookseller, so it's just kind of like, and his family enjoys books, so it's like, "Oh, what are you reading lately?" "Oh, I'm reading this." Da da da. Or we open on Abe, and he's at a picnic table reading Denez Smith's Insert Boy, and it's tucked in there. A lot of the writing workshops, they tell you to read a lot of what's getting published now so that you have a sense of where the industry is at. And I think that being a bookseller, you're always reading, so you kind of know where that is at. So that gives you a little bit of a leg up, which I need because, I don't have an MFA like a lot of people that I'm panels with.
What advice do you have for new writers?
Well, I met my agent at a reading at an author event. Asked a question, and yeah, so she approached me afterwards and asked if I had any work, and that was kind of how we started our relationship. So I would say have a short question that has some insight and maybe hints at the fact that you have hidden work somewhere, and maybe there'll be an agent in the mix somewhere. I would also say when you're writing, don't write until you're done. Leave a little gas in the tank for the next day so that you know where to pick it up. The more days you string together, the more your confidence builds. I'd also say have a writer's group. Like you need outside input big time. That image of a lone genius sitting at a keyboard is that's not a thing. You need community. You need people who can help you get there.
How long did it take you to write this book?
Well, the first that first short story was 2015, and the version that they bought, I think they bought it in 2023. And then, like, I last hit send in October 2024. Yeah, I mean, almost a decade. Hopefully, it's good. It's been polished enough, certainly.
It's amazing. Aaron John Curtis, thank you so much for joining me today on Check This Out.
Rachel, thanks so much. I had a blast, and I appreciated your deep dive. Thanks for having me.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum, author of the novel Atomic Anna. You've been listening to Check This Out, where we dive deeply into the works of emerging and diverse authors you may not have discovered yet. This conversation is a partnership between New Hampshire Public Radio and the Penn Faulkner Foundation. I'll be back next week with Lucas Schaefer. We'll be talking about his brand new debut novel, The Slip. Make sure to check this out. Our producer today is Jessica Hunt. Penn Faulkner's executive director is Gwydion Sullivan. NHPR's program director is Emily Quirk. The show is sponsored by C&S Wholesale Grocers family of companies, the podcast Totally Booked with Zibby, the Jack and Dorothy Byrne Foundation, and the Howe Library Corporation. Remember to go to your local library or local bookstore and check out all the books you hear about here and love. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.